This is Pete Moore on Halo Talks NYC. I have the pleasure of having Dan Millman, hailing from Brooklyn, New York, a former world champion athlete, gymnastics coach, and esteemed author. Dan, welcome to Halo Talks.
Thanks, Pete. Good to be here.
Right. So through peacefulwarrior.com, you've created quite a following, and you've had a lot of twists and turns personally and professionally. So I'd love to have the audience here understand your background and your path and what they can learn on living a more fulfilling life for everything that they want to achieve. So I'll turn it over to you.
Of course, Pete. Thank you. For those who know my book, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, or one of my other 17 books, I probably don't need an introduction, but I'm going to assume most of your listeners aren't familiar with my work. So let me just say, when I was a young athlete, a gymnast at University of California, and also when I was a coach at Stanford University in gymnastics and a college professor after that at Oberlin, I was focused on how you can create more talent for sports. And because I believe that talent was about 80% developed, maybe 20% innate. Certain people have body types for various sports that lend themselves to sports. But I asked myself, if it were true that talent could be developed, and by the way, I define talent as the ability to learn something faster, easier, and rise to higher levels, higher potential. I think that's a fair enough definition of talent. And I said, if it could be developed, what qualities, what physical qualities do you need to increase your level of talent and learn faster and easier? So it seemed to me that there were four main qualities. Strength, most people understand. Muscular control helps us to learn sports, physical movement, and so on. Suppleness or flexibility, most people are familiar with that. Stamina, of course. And the fourth was sensitivity, which includes variables like coordination, rhythm, timing, balance, reflex speed. So I reasoned that when the young athletes came to train with me at Stanford, rather than just working on the moves of gymnastics, the elements, we worked on, for the first year, the foundation of talent. And of course, we all know, and your listeners understand, how to develop more strength, many different methods and techniques, and suppleness and stamina. But sensitivity, it was, how do you develop more coordination, more rhythm, timing, balance? So I gave them exercises to increase their level of talent. Now, my theory did work out pretty well in practice. The Stanford team, when I started, was at the bottom of our conference, the Pacific 8 at the time. And by the time I left 3.5 years later, actually 4 years later, our team was one of the top 3 teams in the United States. So my theories did work in practice. But I'll tell you, I was going through some personal things during that time as a coach, a young coach. And I realized that being able to do handstands and somersaults and these advanced athletic moves didn't really help me much when I went out on a date. Those moves didn't help me when I got married, had children, dealt with financial challenges and career decisions, and what we deal with in everyday life. So that's when I made a shift. I started asking a different question, not how can we develop talent for sport necessarily, but how can we develop more talent for living, for the everyday challenges of everyday life in our career, at home, at work. And that led me on a search that was decades long, where I began to study with various mentors, traveled around the world, and it led to an approach to living I call the Peaceful Warrior's Way. And by the way, it's not my thing, it's all our thing, because all of us, it's really about living with a peaceful heart, but understanding in everyday life, there are times we need a warrior's spirit. And so it's really about all of us. So that brings you kind of up to date how I shifted from the coaching realm into the life's bigger picture. And of course I've stayed active. I've done many different forms of physical exercise. I started at 10 years old with modern dance, and then gymnastics, trampoline, martial arts for 20 years. So I've had a variety of different experiences, and it's led me, what might be relevant to your listeners, it's led me to an understanding that there is no best system of exercise, no best teacher, no best book, no best path or method or diet. There's only the best for each of us at a given time of our life. What worked for us 5 or 10 years ago may not be appropriate now. Life's an experiment. We all have to find out and explore what works best for us. For someone, it may be yoga. For someone else, Pilates. For someone else, various kinds of core strengthening. We all have different needs, different ages. So I think any program that can be tailored, that understands people, that doesn't just teach a subject or a fitness method, but homes in on the individual. What do they need right now? I know doctors do that, chiropractors do that, many different coaches. And, I explored this myself because after I graduated from college for a time, I sold life insurance and I coached at Stanford. Then I was a college professor. Later on, I was a personal fitness coach. One of the first, this was back in the mid-70s. I called my business Rent-A-Coach. And I went to people's homes. Now, this has become more common, but it wasn't then. I almost ended up coaching Steven Spielberg, the director, but I just missed out on that. So the point is, I had to tailor what was each individual's needs and go with that. And that seems to me an effective approach rather than just teaching a subject, so to speak. You reach out to the individual.
Gotcha. So let's just go back to assessing the talent. So the strength, flexibility, stamina, and sensitivity. Where does someone's innate or acquired, desire or fire or attitude kind of overlay into that, or as part of one of those categories?
Well, I wrote a book called Body, Mind, Mastery, a rather unusual book because it's the only book I've ever heard of that has come out under 4 different titles. It was the first book. It was my gift to athletes and anybody training, whether jugglers, martial artists, dancers. It was anybody who physically trains. And it was called Whole Body Fitness. And later that publisher went out of print, and it came back as the Warrior Athlete and then the Inner Athlete. And finally, Body, Mind, Mastery. And it talks about not just physical talent, but emotional talent and mental talent. Because anybody who's coached understands that there are people who are very coordinated, but they're emotionally just out of whack, or they can't concentrate. They have too many distractions. So every coach has to deal with the entire individual. They're not like a history professor who just gives assignments and gives exams and then grades them. Coaches and people who work with people really need to address motivation and their mental preparation, concentration levels, their ability to visualize. In fact, there was a pommel horse performer at Stanford. This young guy, he could hit his routine in practice, but every time he went into competition, he got nervous and he ended up flubbing his routine. And one day I was so frustrated, I said, Dennis, that was his name. I said, go sit in the corner. And I want you to visualize going through your routine again and again. And I wish I could demonstrate this. We don't have the video here, but I looked over and he was like going through his routine. I could tell. And then he went, oh, damn. And then, oh, damn, he was even missing his routine in his head.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So that was part of his problem. So
that's one of the interesting things about, I was just watching, I don't know if you're a football fan, but I was watching the NFL draft last night. And, there are all these variables that these coaches and scouts are trying to assess versus just the technical capabilities of, when they do that NFL combine.
Sure.
It's only based on raw talent and raw skills based on those, whether it's the high jump or whether it's wingspan, I think is one of them now. Obviously the 40-yard dash. I would love to be inside of a room where, it's basically a job interview, right? I mean, they're saying, okay, what's the best player for my team?
Sure.
And all these things. So how have you, or when you're coaching or when you're assisting people now, how do is there besides like a Myers-Briggs or some of these other, questionnaires, how do you kind of get to the root of who that person is and what their potential deficiencies are? As an example, I know when I was back in high school basketball, my coach Kowalski used to say, look, you got to visualize that shot goes in every time. Because if you don't visualize that going in, it's definitely not going in. So how do you help people get to their, root cause of what's holding them back or change their mindset? Obviously, I haven't read all of your books yet, but I think I will after this call since I have some free time on my hands now working from home.
Sure. Well, that's an important topic that you raised, Pete. I'm glad you did, because it must be anybody who's recruiting an athlete. They know physical skill alone is not enough if the mind's distracted, the emotions in turmoil. So there is an approach I take that is a bit different. Now, I mentioned to you that talent is 20% innate. In other words, Michael Phelps, what do you have, webbed hands or feet or something? And basketball players, they can be a hustler, but if they're 5'2", that's going to be a tough road. So we have to look for physical qualities. I know in the Eastern European countries, like Nadia Comaneci, the famous gymnast, they found her in elementary school. They looked at her and they had the kids do certain physical tests. And they said, okay, she's going to be a gymnast. This one's going to be a swimmer. So they did that. It was very sophisticated. Many, many years ago, they started doing that. But it's much more difficult unless you really study somebody or talk with their coach to understand what their mindset is like, their ability to visualize, for example. In fact, in Body Mind Mastery, I cite a study that they had one group of people they were all equal at the ability or inability to shoot from the free throw line in basketball. And they had one group practice physically for X amount of time, something like 10 minutes a day, focused on actually shooting X number of tries to make the free throw shot. They had a second group who just practiced in their head. They stood there, they imagined they were doing the shot. They weren't really holding a basketball. They imagined bouncing and visualizing the shot and shooting. And then they had a third group, a placebo group, just do an unrelated thing, watch television, whatever. And they did find that the group that intensely concentrated, visualized shooting the baskets improved almost as much as the group that physically did it. So that kind of visualization, not the magical new agey visualize success and you'll be successful, but actually doing visualization, imagining, feeling your body going through the motions. I use that in gymnastics all the time when I was training. So, to check out. There are psychological tests. You mentioned the MMPI, which is actually not as scientific as it sounds, but coaches look for many different forms of tests. Now, one of my books, it sold over 1 million copies. It's quite popular. It's called The Life You Were Born to Live. There's also a life purpose app, which has all that information in it that's in the book. But The Life You Were Born to Live, it has uncanny accuracy, and it's a system, an objective system, not guesswork, where you can start to see what challenges each individual has, and they're different. For someone, it may be a difficulty in understanding process, how you have to be patient and do step by step to reach your goal. For someone else, it's self-doubt. That's the thing that beats them up. Someone else, it's insecurity. They're overdriven, a need to prove themselves. So this book helps us access this information about other people or ourselves, more important, to have compassion and understanding of them and understanding of ourselves. So I would say that could be a very good tool. I wish I'd known this when I was a young coach, I'll tell you. So for any recruiter, they have to understand how the person's mind works, their attitude. And for that, the best, quickest way is to interview coaches, people who've worked with them before, teammates, if they really do their homework, not just their win-loss records and so on. So that's how I would answer that. Now, there are 3 principles that I've given to athletes. I spoke with the Canadian trampoline team, because it's an Olympic sport now. Before they went into competition, we had a little party, and I gave them these 3 principles that one is important for any individual to accept their feelings and thoughts, positive or negative, as natural to them in the moment. Mm-hmm. So people have all kinds of thoughts popping into their awareness. People have all kinds of emotions passing through them like the weather. Sometimes they're positive, they're motivated, they're confident, other times not. So to just accept that, you don't have to fix it, change it, worry about it. because athletes can get so neurotic. They walk around playing visualization tapes and motivational tapes while they're waiting to go up and compete.
Right.
And, there's a saying, Barbara Rasp, a writer, once said, "The lesson is simple, the student is complicated." And so we complicate these things, trying to do all these techniques that may or may not work. Some of them are like Dumbo's feather, for those who've seen that old movie Dumbo, placebo type things. But if they simply accept their reality in the moment, okay, I'm having these thoughts, these feelings, I don't need to fix them, worry about them. And the second thing is, what is your purpose? Focus on your goal in that moment. And the third is, do whatever it is you need to do in line with your goal. It's very respectful of individual process. Now, that sounds like a bumper sticker wisdom. Accept your feelings and thoughts, know your purpose, and do what needs to be done. But someone might say, well, how do you do that? What if you're feeling self-doubt? What if you're not confident enough or you're insecure? Let that be. Because the fact is, and this is a fact of reality, Pete, we have more control by our will over our behavior, over what we actually do, than what emotions are passing through us in the moment or what thoughts. We don't have a spam filter in our head to stop certain thoughts. So let's focus on what we have more control over. Our lives are shaped in large part by what we have done in the past and what we do. And so it's not putting as much attention in trying to fix our insides and have just the right thoughts and just the right feelings so we can go out and do what we need to do. And I can tell a lot of stories, but the fact is, we can control our efforts in life. We cannot control the outcomes. No one can guarantee a certain outcome. If they could, I could teach golfers how to one putt every time.
Right.
Even the best basketball players miss sometimes. So the point is, we can't control the outcomes, but we can control our efforts. By making a good effort over time, we vastly increase the odds of getting the outcome which we'd like. Was it Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan who said you make 0% of the shots you don't take?
Yeah, I think it was Gretzky.
Yeah, probably Gretzky. So we can take the shot.
So when you think, so let's think about this from a standpoint of I'm a health club operator or I'm a fitness boutique studio and I'm trying to hire my top 5 people in a new venture. If you were, the recruiting advisor, how would you kind of come to the table and say, look, obviously we can assess the raw talent, whether it's a chief marketing officer, whether it's a chief operating officer, we've got titles and we've got a job description. How would you kind of lead someone down a path of saying, here's the right hire and here's why, and here's the raw talent, but here's, what's going through their head. And I don't know how much of a science that is, but I just want to throw it out there because people sometimes hire executives or new employees and they might not have the right filter that they're using to think about, what their team is. I mean, setting up a company is putting people towards a common goal through a legal entity. And that legal entity then makes decisions, and those decisions become the operating, procedure. So maybe just from a business standpoint, how help us think through that.
Sure. First of all, I don't have any magic formulas. Nobody does. Just to draw a quick analogy, and then I'll get right to your question. Somerset Maugham, a Nobel Prize winning writer, once said there are 3 essential rules for writing a successful novel. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are. So the point I'm making here is, if I could tell you that I'd be making, tens of millions of dollars a year, if I could tell executive recruiters in any field how to know for sure your hiree, and that would be a question for executive recruiters. Now, if someone were going for, I think people have informal lists in their mind when they're looking at a possible employee to work in a health club or fitness studio, for example. Did they show up on time? Many times people are very good at interviewing. They can charm people, but it doesn't mean they're in it for the long haul. Maybe they're waiting for the next opportunity and then they leave. So just because someone is a good interview doesn't make it a slam dunk. of whether they are the best hiree. Many people probably who hire make these lists. For example, maybe enthusiasm or clarity, how well they communicate, because that's so important, how you teach and interact with other people. Even if you don't know quite as much, there are other people who know a lot about a subject. They know a lot about fitness. They have a background, but something about them isn't real motivating. They're judgmental or whatever. And the interesting thing I've noticed in interviews, people give away. There's tells. There are these quirks. They may say something that kind of puts you off that you make a note of.
Mm-hmm.
Almost self-sabotage sometimes. Their subconscious is saying, maybe I'm not right for this job.
Mm.
So I think it's largely an intuitive process. But yeah, you can have certain questions to ask, certain litmus tests that any club owner. I've never made up a list like this. So that's my observations on the topic. I remember Moneyball, that movie Moneyball in the book.
Sure.
He had a more of a scientific approach, was counterintuitive. People thought it was a joke until the team started winning.
Right.
So I think it's still in development, and there are people who know more about that particular question than I do, but that's what I could offer.
Gotcha. That's appreciated. So we made an investment recently in a company called the Athlete Book, and the goal is to take Division 1, 2, and 3 athletes and help them get jobs with large companies. And the pitch for hiring athletes was these people have been on an organized team. If they've been on the team for 4 years, that means they've showed up. That means if they've got playing time, that means they made the cut. They've got grit. They are disciplined. What else would you add to the list of, reasons why you should lean towards hiring athletes versus, other potential candidates?
I knew a man named Dick Wolf, and Dick went to interview to be a coach at Cal State Fullerton in California. And the athletic director said, well, so were you in the Olympics in gymnastics? And he said, no. He said, well, what were you a national champion of? He said, I wasn't a national champion. He said, well, where did you compete in gymnastics? He said, I never competed in gymnastics. He said, well, what are you doing here? He said, I'm a really good coach. Mm-hmm. And if you want to hire a competitor, go find a competitor. If you want to coach, consider me. Well, they did hire him on faith, and he was coach of the year I don't know how many times. Developed an incredible team. So the point I'm making here, roundabout, is that a good athlete is not necessarily a good coach or teacher just because they're skilled at doing the moves. So again, talk to people. That's what I would do. I wouldn't try to just guess and intuit it on my own. I would talk to people who've worked with him. Mm-hmm. Find them. And that will tell much more than just saying, well, let's see, this is their win-loss record. They're a famous athlete. Now, some people like having a famous athlete on board or an accomplished one because they can put it up in their resume when they're writing about their different staff members, and that's their choice. And they may be an excellent coach. I was a world champion on the trampoline and a national champion on floor and vaulting and All-American and so on. That didn't mean I was necessarily a good coach, but it turned out I was because I had the communication abilities. So again, that's the best I can offer in terms of any surefire way. There aren't any surefire ways. Sometimes you let employees know that you have a probationary period of a month. That should tell you much more. So that's what I would tell someone who owned a health club and was looking at personnel.
Gotcha. So, given this this stay-at-home mandate that we're in for now, at least for another couple of weeks, and this could be longer. People have time to do some real soul searching. So, could you give a little background on the life you were born to live, and people that you're talking to now, whether that's friends, whether that's colleagues, what kind of self-reflection you're hearing about? People saying, hey, I was exhausted and now I'm actually feeling like I have time to think and decide what I want to do. And maybe you've got a lot of people that could come out of this similar to 9/11 in a sense to say, you know what, I want to reset my life and I am in control of that decision. I don't need to go back onto the field and play the same game.
Well, I found, I shattered my leg in a motorcycle crash. Anybody who's seen the movie based on my book, the movie's called Peaceful Warrior. And it's about a young gymnast. He meets an old gas station attendant, played by Nick Nolte in the film. And that really happened to me. I did shatter my leg in 40 pieces when I was at the peak of my career. And it was a comeback story because I was able to actually, through a lot of work, come back, and we won the NCAA championships as a team, and I helped lead the team in that endeavor. And I came back better than I was before, but more skillful. I had a chance. In fact, anybody listening who has had an injury often comes back and they have the phenomenon, wow, my technique's better. They've had a chance to really think about it and let it settle in, as you were pointing out, Pete. So during this, lemons to lemonade kind of period of sheltering in, it is a time to reflect on what's important in life, on our priorities. And there are two books. One is a smaller book. It's a fairly quick read. It's called The Four Purposes of Life. And just as we divide the points on a compass into four directions, and the seasons of the days of the year into four seasons, by looking at our lives through the lens of these four purposes, which is learning life's lessons, and there's a lot more to that category. The second is finding our career and calling, and the difference between the two, and what that's about. The third is about finding our life path, which is what I was talking about, referring to the life you were born to live. That's about finding our life path and the individual avenues. And then the fourth purpose is maybe the most important, our purpose arising in each moment. My purpose is clear as I'm speaking with you, and so is yours. So the Four Purposes of Life covers a lot in a fairly small book. Now, the life you were born to live, the reason it's been so popular, because it is accurate. And let me put it this way. If I were to point to a tree outside anywhere, chances are there's not a single tree on the entire planet exactly like that tree in terms of the angle of every branch, leaf, and stem. But we can say things that apply to redwood trees that are different from aspens or birches or oaks. So in that way, even though each of us is a unique individual, there are patterns we follow. And it turns out there are 45 different patterns or life paths. And that can reveal a lot about someone. Now, anybody who reads The Life You Were Born to Live and tries to use it as a template for whether or not to hire somebody, it's not designed for that purpose. Because there are people on every life path who are successful in every field. It's about how they approach the field, what weaknesses they may have, hurdles to overcome, but also what innate strengths they have. Certain people have more charisma than others. Certain people have higher vision and standards. So the book does reveal these things. So that's, if someone wanted to do some reading and introspection during this period, I'd recommend The Four Purposes of Life and The Life You Were Born to Live. And I'm pretty damn sure that nobody's going to be disappointed with either book when they look into it. So, and again, that's why they've done extremely well in the marketplace.
Well, I'm gonna take you up on that. So you'll see 2 downloads on audiobooks by the time we're off this podcast. So as you talk to people and coach people, and they say to you, Dan, I wish I did this, or I should have done, or I could have, start using those words. And I'm assuming that some of that's in the book. And I usually tell people when they hire Integrity Square, our firm, I say, look, experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. So let me tell you about some of the experiences that were positive, and let me tell you the ones that were negative. And, life is a movie, and, you want to live this movie, here's the path you can go down. Or, maybe take my advice of how, certain situations ended, and determine if that's the likely outcome. So how do you look at, somebody's resume or some of their past experiences? I think Bill Gates was one who said, I want to hire people that have failed before, because it comes with a level of humility, a level of understanding, and that's experience that's valuable. Not sure if that's a question, maybe an open-ended commentary for you to opine on.
Well, sure. I appreciate the commentary too. Well, in general, we do know this. Sometimes I ask audiences when I'm speaking to a group, Please raise your hand if you've ever experienced physical, emotional, or mental pain in your life. Of course, all the hands go up. And it's fine to disagree, because if we agree on everything, only one of us is necessary. But I say, I hope you can agree on this, that adversity that you went through, that difficulty, that challenge, that bump in the road, wouldn't you say you're a little bit stronger now? Maybe a little bit wiser, you have a different perspective, and maybe even more compassionate. And most people raise their hand. So in that sense, adversity is always has hidden gifts. Even the period we're going through right now as we speak, the world is experiencing this, and we can make use of that, because daily life is kind of a form of spiritual weightlifting. You don't lift any weights, you don't get any stronger. So any challenge put before us, we don't have to pretend to like them, but we have to keep that thread of attention that we will get a little stronger, a little wiser, and to make good use of that time. So yes, I failed 50 times a day in the gym. To me, that was just part of the process. You
Right.
fail until you finally succeed. When I was 60 years old, I wanted to do something different, something special, and I decided to learn to ride a unicycle. And a friend of mine loaned me his unicycle, told me to go to a tennis court early in the morning before anyone was there, and because I had a nice level surface, and hold on to the chain link fence. I got a death grip on the fence trying to sit on this unicycle. Anybody who's tried it, it's really humbling, I'll tell you. And to make this story short, all I did was fail. I mean, it went out from under me. It went out from under me. But after 3 weeks of failing, I could ride figure eights around the court on this unicycle. And I learned 2 things from that process. One was everything is difficult until it becomes easy. And the second thing I learned was there are times where if everything seems to fall apart. I was worse than I was 4 days before that, instead of continuing to improve. But then I noticed that after those so-called bad days, I usually had a breakthrough the next day or two. Because that's when the learning was happening on those so-called bad days. It was going from the front brain to the back brain, so to speak. From like learning to drive a gear shift car, you have to think about it a lot until it's automatic. And that's how skill training happens. So that was a useful thing in relationships. We can hit a crisis point, but if we work through it and continue, we can break through to new levels of intimacy. In sports, in ideas and brainstorming, if we just work on it, and then we don't know what we're doing. Everything's confusing, but if we keep at it, problem solving, we have breakthroughs. So it's about persisting, of course. That's what the method is. That's what the whole idea behind it is. And every athlete, anybody who's done striving in the fitness area knows this, that you have low points, but if you persist with it, you break through to a new level. Go ahead.
Let me just change gears for 1 minute, because you made me think about something. When I was in 9th grade, I was the captain of the basketball team, and my Coach K, used to yell at me all the time. And I thought I was doing exactly what he wanted me to do, and he just kept yelling at me. And I went up to him after practice one day, and I said, "Hey man, why do you keep yelling at me like I'm doing everything that I'm required to do, and how the play is supposed to be run?" And he looks me in the eye and he says, "Pete, if I don't yell at you, that means I don't think you're going to be better. And I'm going to devote my time to making you better. And part of it is putting more pressure on you and making sure that I can make you achieve more than what you can achieve right now." Do you see a paradigm shift in, youth soccer, where they don't keep score? Everyone plays and it's more recreational than it is competitive. Does any of that concern you, or do you feel like we've just kind of reached a different, stage of evolution in, helping people get to the next level? I think college football and NFL, I'd say, after I watch like School of Hard Knocks or something, like, they're obviously on top of people. But, I just wonder if, when I teach my nephew how to play basketball and I get a little loud with him, I use that phrase. And I think he gets it, that I want to make him better. So how have you kind of seen a paradigm shift, or do you think that still goes on and we're getting people to their top potential?
I think it still goes on, personally, Pete, in different forms. It's not, I mean, we all know that the archetypal drill sergeant who really cares about the men he trains or the women he trains or she trains, and they're really hard on them. I mean, we know about drill sergeants, right? And some coaches are more like that. They're really tough, but what they're doing is they're treating people as having the potential to be great, and they're not going to give them any slack. Right. Most of us can look back on teachers we've had in school. Some of the most strict teachers and most demanding were the ones we remember years later, because they were treating us as the people we were capable of becoming.
Yep.
So, yeah, I thought that coach, what he told you was really a good thing. He was reframing it. I don't yell at you just to put you down. I'm yelling at you because I expect more from you. And people tend to rise to our level of expectations. And, it's important for many of us to understand that criticism is always a form of caring. It may not look like it. It may not sound like it.
That's great.
If someone didn't criticize you, I mean, if they didn't care at all, why would they bother criticizing you? So they're giving you their full attention and giving you some passion. So even if it's not very sophisticated criticism, even if it's not understanding, compassionate, I like those people who are spirited and really honest because they're paying attention. We count them. We matter. So to me, I think that still works.
Yeah, great. So in closing here, because we're going to fast track this podcast up on the network. So I got the 4 purposes of life. I've got the life you were born to live. I want to just give our audience some background on where they could pick up these books and audio books and start to better their existence here as we are in halftime.
Sure. The 4 purposes of life is available: audio, Kindle, digital, print, everywhere. The life you were born to live is such a massive reference work because it has all 45 life paths and some other interesting information, that it's not an audio. I should tell you that, but it's on Kindle. There's a life purpose app you can get for Android or iPhones, iOS, iTunes Store, whatever. So anywhere books are sold, online, wherever, it's easy to find all my books. Or they can just go to peacefulwarrior.com, look up books, and they'll see all the books with a description. That's another approach to take.
I think we've got yes. In closing here, we usually ask people for quotes, but I think we've filled up our quote quota. So I really appreciate getting the opportunity to talk to you. I think what you're doing is amazing work, and I'm glad we were able to cross paths here, because I think I'm going to do some self-reflection and read through these books and come out even stronger from this. So welcome to the Halo sector, and I hope we meet in person. And if I see any guy in Brooklyn with a unicycle, I'm going to try and tackle you and tell you who I am.
Good speaking with you, Pete, and best to do them to you. All right.
Pleasure. Thanks, Dan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.